Okay, so get ready, because today we're diving into something truly fascinating. We're talking about Carl Jung's concept of the shadow.
The shadow.
Yeah,
Ooh.
that hidden part of ourselves we like to pretend doesn't exist.
Right.
But spoiler alert, it's there, lurking beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
And to help us unpack this, we're turning to a brilliant interview with renowned Jungian analyst Dr. James Hollis.
Amazing.
Get ready to uncover some seriously insightful stuff.
What's so interesting about this is it's not just some abstract psychological theory.
Right.
Understanding your shadow can have a real impact, like a profound impact on your everyday life, your relationships, your career, how you interact with the world around you.
Absolutely. And Dr. Hollis breaks this down so clearly. He explains that the shadow isn't about being evil or anything like that. It's more about the parts of ourselves that we just don't want to face, you know?
Yeah.
Those hidden motivations, unlived dreams, even those embarrassing childhood moments that still make you cringe a little.
Totally. We all have them.
Yeah, it's like when you unexpectedly snap at a coworker and then immediately you're like, why did I do that?
Oh, yeah.
Or you get caught in this heated argument where you're convinced the other person is being totally unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Those are glimpses of the shadow, often slipping out unconsciously.
And that unconscious aspect is key, right?
Absolutely.
Dr. Hollis talks about how the shadow can manifest in a few different ways.
Okay.
And these unconscious reactions, like we just mentioned, are a big one.
Right.
This, like, we're on autopilot reacting in ways that even surprise us.
Yeah, and then that ties into another way that the shadow can show up.
And this one is huge in relationships. It's called projection.
Projection.
So we're taking those qualities, those unwanted traits that we don't want to acknowledge in ourselves, and we're putting them on other people.
Oh, it's so true. It's always easier to spot the flaws in someone else than to own them in ourselves.
Right. And it's not just in our individual relationships where this plays out.
Okay.
Think about how easily we demonize entire groups of people, different cultures, people with different political views.
Man.
That's often the shadow at work on a societal level.
It's a sobering thought for sure.
It is.
And speaking of sobering, Dr. Hollis doesn't let us off the hook easily.
No, he doesn't.
He emphasizes that even good people have a shadow.
Yes.
It's not about being morally good or bad. It's about the inherent complexity of being human. We all have these darker impulses and hidden aspects within us. It's just part of the deal.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because, as Dr. Hollis explains, ignoring our shadow doesn't make it disappear.
Right.
In fact, it can actually have some pretty significant consequences.
Okay.
Not just for us, but for those around us.
Really?
He uses this chilling quote to really drive this point home. He says, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent."
Wow. That's a powerful statement.
It is. It's a stark reminder that our own unaddressed shadow doesn't just impact us. It gets passed down
Wow.
to future generations.
Hmm.
So if we're not willing to do the work of understanding and integrating our own shadow, we risk perpetuating unhealthy patterns and cycles in our families and communities.
Okay, so we're starting to see just how important this whole shadow thing really is.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it actually look like when this unaddressed shadow starts to manifest in our lives?
Right.
And is there anything we could do to regain control of the wheel?
Yeah, good question.
This is where it gets really practical. So stay tuned as we keep unpacking the shadow in our next segment.
It's like he says, doing our shadow work isn't just about like individual self-improvement.
Right.
It's actually a social responsibility.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that our own journeys of growth and healing have this ripple effect on the world around us.
I love that. That's such a powerful way to think about it. I mean, sometimes we need that little wake-up call,
Totally.
to even realize how much we're operating on autopilot.
Yeah.
It's like we're sleepwalking through life, driven by these unexamined parts of ourselves.
It's so true. And he actually shares this hilarious anecdote in the interview about this.
Oh, really?
It's about a time he was in the hospital.
Oh, is this the one where the nurse asks him, like, what's the difference between psychology and psychoanalysis?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
And he's explaining, that analysts are really trying to stimulate a conversation with the unconscious.
Right.
To bring those hidden aspects to light.
Okay.
And the nurse thinks about it for a minute. She's like, "Oh, I get it. You work with people in comas."
Oh, my gosh. That's both funny and kind of terrifying at the same time.
It is.
Because it really highlights how we can be so asleep to these unconscious patterns, just running the show behind the scenes.
It's a brilliant analogy for how we can sleepwalk through life, just reacting to situations instead of responding consciously
Right.
from a place of greater self-awareness.
And that brings us to another key takeaway from this interview.
Okay.
And it ties in beautifully with this idea of like waking up from our slumber.
Yes.
It's about moving beyond that constant pursuit of happiness
right.
and instead leaning into a deeper sense of meaning in our lives.
Yes. He reminds us that life is full of challenges, disappointments, even tragedies.
It's true.
To only expect sunshine and rainbows is setting ourselves up
Totally.
for a lot of unnecessary disillusionment and suffering.
He actually says that the smallest of things with meaning is always greater than the largest of things without meaning.
I love that.
It's not about chasing those fleeting moments of happiness.
Yeah.
It's about finding fulfillment in the things that resonate with our core values and aspirations.
It's so true.
You know, the things that light us up from the inside out, even in the face of life's inevitable curveballs.
And discovering those things, right, uncovering that deeper meaning,
Yeah.
often requires embracing change.
Oh, yeah,
Even when it feels uncomfortable,
for sure.
even when it feels destabilizing. Because remember, as Jung recognized, change is fundamental to nature. It's the one constant we can always rely on.
Right.
Yet so often our egos crave that certainty and control,
Oh, it's so true.
even when it's holding us back.
We see this all the time, right? We cling to relationships, jobs, even outdated beliefs that are no longer serving us.
Yes.
Just because it feels safer or more familiar than venturing into the unknown.
Exactly. But as he points out, it's often that very resistance to change,
Right.
that clinging to the familiar that ends up causing us the most suffering. He uses this really striking metaphor of the ego being like a tiny boat on a vast iridescent ocean of the unconscious.
Okay, I love that visual.
Yeah.
So you're on this tiny boat, you're trying to navigate this vast, powerful ocean.
Right. You can try to control things from the surface.
Right.
You can steer, you can adjust the sails.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we're at the mercy of the currents and depths below.
Wow.
And those depths are vast and mysterious, full of unacknowledged emotions, memories, and impulses that can easily capsize our little boats if we're not careful.
So to bring this back to the shadow, how do we navigate those choppy waters?
Right.
How do we actually start integrating these hidden parts of ourselves instead of letting them run the show?
Well, thankfully, he offers some really practical advice here.
Hey.
He says the first step is to simply pay attention to those recurring patterns that keep showing up in our lives.
You mean like those relationship conflicts that we keep finding ourselves in?
Exactly.
Or those self-sabotaging behaviors we just can't seem to break?
Those are breadcrumbs leading us straight to our shadow.
Yeah.
Those patterns are trying to tell us something. They're an invitation to look a little deeper.
So it sounds like step one is getting really curious about those repeating patterns, those breadcrumbs that lead us to our shadow.
Yeah.
But what do we do once we've uncovered those parts of ourselves?
That's where the real work begins, right? And it's not always easy.
Yeah.
It requires us to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Okay.
What am I avoiding? What old wounds need healing? Where do I need to take responsibility?
It's like we're finally facing those things we've been pushing down, for years, maybe our whole lives.
Exactly. But the rewards are immense. We start to live with more self-awareness, more compassion for ourselves and others, and ultimately more freedom to make choices that are in alignment with our values.
So it's a journey worth taking, even if it's a little bumpy at times.
Absolutely. And speaking of bumpy journeys, he actually tells this great story in here about losing his keys.
Oh, right.
That perfectly illustrates this point.
I remember that story.
Yeah.
He was rushing to catch a flight
Yes.
after giving this lecture on Buddhism. Talk about irony.
Exactly. He'd just been talking about, the importance of letting go of the ego's need for control.
Right.
Of surrendering to the present moment. And of course, what happens?
Right.
He loses his keys and misses his flight.
It's like the universe has a sense of humor.
It really does. And he talks about this concept of the trickster archetype, which Jung described as this force in our lives that disrupts our expectations, that shakes things up, often when we least expect it.
Right. Like losing your keys after giving a lecture on letting go of control.
Exactly.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the frustration of those moments.
Yeah.
But maybe those disruptions are actually trying to teach us something.
It's like those moments when it feels like everything's falling apart,
Huh.
or actually the universe like trying to get our attention.
Yes.
Maybe our shadow's trying to talk to us.
Exactly. It's about learning to ask ourselves, what is this experience trying to teach me?
Mm,
Where do I need to let go of control?
yeah,
How can I embrace the unknown with a little more grace?
right.
Maybe even a sense of humor.
This has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much just by listening to you unpack all of this.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, this is a lifelong journey. There's no finish line when it comes to integrating your shadow.
Well, that's a good reminder.
There will always be new layers to uncover, new insights to gain.
It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up with curiosity and compassion for ourselves and all the messy, complicated parts of being human.
Beautifully said.
Well, on that note, we'll leave our listeners with this final thought inspired by Dr. Hollis's story about losing his keys. What trickster events in your own life might be trying to teach you something about your shadow self? Until next time, keep exploring those hidden depths.